Let's discuss the three different tests included in the Naglieri General Ability Tests. Dina, can you start with the verbal test?
Long ago when Jack started, Dr. Naglieri was saying, there's got to be a way to measure verbal ability regardless of the language that the student speaks without language. And we kind of percolated over that for a few years. And Jack came to us and said, okay, I've got an idea. And I'll just speak to the verbal part. A lot of it was based on Alexandria Luria's language cognition. He is a psychologist who specialized in this area. And what we're doing in this test, it's a verbal test that has no language, that has no words. So regardless of the language that the child speaks, they can use their conceptual understanding of language, how language is developed conceptually. Even though we all speak a different language, we are all, there's no such thing as a nonverbal person. We think with language. So basically the test items each involve a concept that's depicted through pictures. And what the student will have to do is look at those pictures and find what's common in them and how they relate to each other. And they start off, some of them very simple to begin with, and they become very complex. MHS connected with experts in culture and linguistics to make sure that the items that we're using were not biased against certain cultures. So for example, if we're looking at animals, there's certain animals that we couldn't use because they would be insulting to a certain culture, or certain foods or certain experiences that we could depict through a picture. So what the students will have to do is think about what concept those items are representing, and they'll do that regardless of the language that they speak, because they're thinking about how they think about those, relate to those. This test is not the verbal, I can speak to especially, it's not measuring anything that they will have learned in school or read in a book, but rather how they think conceptually. So it's measuring their thinking processes as opposed to what they may have learned.
Dr. Naglieri, would you like to explain about the nonverbal section of the test?
Sure. So the nonverbal portion of the test is one that's made by using diagrams and shapes and colors and rotations and things like that. The student needs to understand the relationships of all these shapes to arrive at the answer. And it's very much like the Naglieri Nonverbal Ability Test, which I published previously. And it has a funny title, nonverbal. It's kind of like not the greatest definition, actually, because it tells you what it isn't. It doesn't tell you what it is. But it is a measure of general ability. And by that, what I mean is a foundational ability that allows you to solve many kinds of problems, whether they are verbal or so-called nonverbal or quantitative. It doesn't really matter. It's this foundation ability that is being measured. We call it general ability. And we can measure it using diagrams, or as Dina's already described, using words. And as Kim will describe next, in the quantitative.
I think everybody's familiar with the phrase that math is a universal language. And the reason that people say that is because math is really the same all over the world. And regardless of the language that goes along with, math helps people learn and communicate. And so one of the big challenges with other tests that I have administered in order to determine reasoning ability, especially in math, is the enormous amount of language that's necessary in the directions of these assessments. And so when we were developing the quantitative portion of this, the questions are presented with numbers and shapes, and the students are asked to identify the pattern. So the relationships, the pattern, the sequences among numbers and symbols determine the reasoning ability of the student that's taking it. The directions are very minimal. I think that we'll probably talk about that later. But the quantitative reasoning piece of it does not involve any language. It's we're able to do this without confounding it with a lengthy amount of directions. The tests require students to examine relationships, patterns, sequences among numbers and symbols. And it's just basic math. It's basic math concepts. There isn't really anything complicated. There are no math word problems that have to be solved. And again, the questions can be solved regardless of the language that's spoken by the students that are taking it.
So how were these tests developed?
So we started off with a couple of goals, which I think are apparent. We wanted to reduce the amount of knowledge required. We wanted to do something about the verbal instructions. Most tests have really lengthy verbal instructions, and obviously that's an obstacle. So what we did was we created animated video that introduces each of the three tests, with the three types of content. So the student watches a little avatar, move the mouse, and arrive at the right answer, and navigate to the next question. The other thing that we do, we don't require the student to speak. So in a typical individually administered intelligence test, student needs to speak. And the more you speak, the more likely you're going to get a higher score. In this case, it's multiple choice, so that's not necessary.
One of the benefits of working in a school district is that we have access to these kids. So as we're developing the verbal items, and we developed several hundred of them, I would go into the schools and we would just show the items to the kids and just listen to them as they talk through it. And so we did this basically from preschool through middle school. And then when we started piloting the test, I also went in and administered the test with different groups of students, gifted and general ed. But afterward, I would collect them and we would just go through the test items and just listen to them, their conversations. And they were super excited about it. The discussions that they had was, and you would see somebody smirking because they saw the answer in a different way. So it was just fun to see that how appealing the items were to the students and how excited they were to actually take the test. And sometimes they didn't want to stop or they didn't want to let go of an item, and because then they had these conversations later of trying to decide whose answer was best. And so from those experiences, I realized that this was going to be something that was going to be very attractive to them and engaging, and because it's challenging and it's a different way to take a test.
I happen to work in a school that has all highly and profoundly gifted kids that go here every day. And so, like Dina said, it was really exciting to be able to take the test items and to repeat what Dina said, there were several hundred that were developed over the course of the time frame that we were doing this. So it was really fun to be able to take them and have the kids take a look at them. We all worked very separately on these test items. We didn't collaborate. The three of us did not. Dina worked on verbal, Jack worked on nonverbal, I worked on quantitative. And I know, Jack, you collaborated with both Dina and me. But I did not see Dina's items until they were far, far developed. And to sit and actually go through the verbal items, it was really an experience for me. And it was fun to actually go through and talk about each and every one of those concepts. And so it's enjoyable. The kids enjoy taking these. They don't seem like test items. They seem like puzzles and challenges, and the kids are really engaged. It doesn't feel like a test. It doesn't seem like a test. It's just kids solving problems that they have not seen before. I think it's important to note that it wasn't Dina, Jack, me sitting around coming up with these items. I know that I had a tremendous amount of support from PhD research scientists at MHS, that they were with us all along the way and supporting us and making suggestions. And there's just so much research that went into this very, very lengthy process. This was not a quick process at all. And we had a lot of people that do this all day, every day, helping us along the way.